you're always a little bit on that thin line between thinking, okay, now I made a budget, so I'm hopeful that this will work out. But then on the other hand, you see, oh wow, if it doesn't work out, then I have to let go more people.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Philippe, a very warm welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
It's good to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
You are the co-founder and CFO/COO at TrekkSoft, a booking solution for the tour and activities market. And before we talk about your impressive story, I want to start with your personal background. You actually studied business administration at the University of St. Gallen here in Switzerland, and your first job after university was at Zimtkorn, a web agency, together with Adrian Locher, also a former Swisspreneur guest, and Valentin Binnendijk, your co-founder at TrekkSoft later down the road. So I just wonder, where did that entrepreneurial spirit come from? What sort of kept you into that startup, that agency's entrepreneurial story business, basically, instead of going for a big job at the corporate?
Actually, I have to correct you a bit, because the first entrepreneurial experience I had was when I was 18 years old. I founded a company, or it was not a company, it was more like a website. It's called prüfungen.ch. That was my first kind of experience with being an entrepreneur, you know. So that was during my high school years. And we had the great idea to collect all old kind of exams from high school, right? That's the reason why it's like in German, prüfungen.ch, right? And then we did upload them on a server. Like, so I had that PDFs, you know, just like a normal scanner, right? So I was like scanning hundreds of exams, right? Old exams. Right. And basically with that kind of project, the teachers were so lazy that they always used the same tests, right? So, and that's the way we got a lot of traffic. And back in those days, you could live off that traffic by selling advertising in one form or the other. So that was really my first experience. But later on, during then my studies at the University of St. Gallen, I met Adrian and Valentin. And the funny thing was Valentin Binnendijk. So he's my co-founder at TrekkSoft, and he's also running now IOMA, his own new startup. But Valentin had a similar project called hsginfo.net. And it was the same kind of idea, right? So you collect like the same business model if you want, right? So you collect all the exams from university teachers. They also, sorry, not all of you, but some of you are lazy. And then basically we basically started like with that project together. And then we evolved into another great idea. So it wasn't like the most innovative idea, but it was a good way to make money during the studies. And that was somehow creating websites for small, medium-sized companies. And that was Zimtkorn. Adrian Locher was the creative director back then. So he was very creative, and he evolved as well, right, into many different roles in his life. But that was really a good time.
It's just fascinating to see, you know, the early days of your entrepreneurial career, and also where the ways basically came together with these serial founders, so to speak. Just a quick follow-up question on your prüfungen.ch business model. So you just offered the exams free of charge and were fully financed by advertising, or did you also charge for the actual access to the exams?
Yeah, you know, back then, you know, I was 18 years old, right? Yeah. But we had quite a bit of media attention back then, because it was a good story. Like the Swiss television, SRF, they came to my high school, and you know, so I'm from Interlaken, so they came to my high school in Interlaken, and they wanted basically to see what happens, right? Because like basically it was also a legal question, because the intellectual property was belonging to the teachers, right? Not to me, right? So I basically was doing like, let's call it a gray zone. So, and yeah. So it was an interesting kind of of story, but like from a monetization perspective, like I was really just discovering how to monetize. So I had a bit of advertising revenue, but no membership revenue. So yeah.
It's a good start.
Yeah, it's a good start. Yeah.
And where does that drive come from? Do you have any entrepreneurs or role models in your family that inspired you to pursue that path? Or was it just more like, hey, I saw a problem, something that I want to use myself, so I just started uploading these exams?
Yeah, I think it was really out of own initiative to just to do something and just basically, I think to some degree make a bit of money, yeah, for sure, but also then to develop something new, right? And I think I didn't have back then a role model in my family or something like that.
Got it.
No.
What's also interesting is if we look at your agency together with Valentin and Adrian, you all then also pursued careers in different paths, right? So basically, Adrian did, I think, many different things from Dine Deal now into the artificial intelligence space. And you then eventually landed in the tourism and outdoor sports market. So how did that passion emerge? Where did that come from?
So after my studies in St. Gallen, I wanted to go back home. So, and back home for me is, that's also changing now in my life a bit, but back then it was Interlaken. And I really missed my home, right? Interlaken, that mountain town,
That's
between the two
spot.
lakes, and like Eigermönch and Jungfrau, right? I do a bit of advertising here for my hometown. So, I wanted to go back home. And in Interlaken, the reality is really, tourism is so dominant as the industry, right? So like, what else can you do really if you're a young entrepreneur and you wanna have success? I think or success sounds a bit ambitious, but I basically my goal was to do something, right? To change something, and I think the tourism industry was really the thing to do. So and then I was lucky, I have to say, because I came to Outdoor Interlaken, which is the leading adventure company in Switzerland. We organize rafting, canyoning, and all those exciting adventure activities in Interlaken. And they were searching for somebody to help out, basically. So I have to specify. So not to help out basically in the boat, right? But more, or as a guide, but more to help out in back office, marketing, and that stuff, right? Yep. And so I did, right? That was back in 2007, and
that's basically how it emerged from there.
Exactly.
Along the way, you actually also met your third co-founder, Jon. Can you talk a bit more about how you met and what basically made the relationship so special that you then decided to start a company together?
Yeah, so Jon was he's one of the founders of Outdoor Interlaken. Okay. He's originally from New Hampshire in the US, and he moved in relatively young ages to Switzerland. He met his wife, how it is, love, and then basically he stayed in Switzerland, and he was one of the founders and owners of Outdoor Interlaken. That's how we met. He was basically the one asking me, hey, would you have some capacity to help out at Outdoor Interlaken? And since then, I think one really special thing in the Outdoor Interlaken environment, and not only Outdoor Interlaken, but just in that kind of guide environment, raft guides, canyoning guides, all those people, they are very honest people, very, very, just like they have it's fun to work with them. There's really good people. Right.
Cool. Yeah. And I imagine then you mentioned 2007, you actually joined Outdoor Interlaken. And then at the certain point, you also realized that there's a problem that you could solve with software, I imagine. So because in 2010, you then co-founded TrekkSoft together with Jon and also Valentin, who you already worked with previously. So what was the specific problem that you then saw, and what frustrated you so much that you had to create your own company around it?
So shortly after 2007, I think it was already 2008, 2009, we basically needed a booking solution. It was for Outdoor Interlaken and a couple of other companies in Interlaken. And we the companies were using different systems back then. One of the systems I remember is called Hostel World, which is basically not a system for tours and activities or experiences, but it's more like a system for hostels, to book hostels online. And we thought, okay, that's not optimal. And then we had a look in the market, are there systems already available in existence? And then I think, if I look today and look back, right, I think we were a bit, we can do that better, right?
Yes.
But I think it would be not entirely true, I think, if we would say, okay, there were no system in existence, right? So I think there were systems in existence, but we thought we can do it better. And then luckily, because I thought, okay, now I need somebody who can code and who can get it done, basically to build an online booking system for experiences for Outdoor Interlaken and all those other companies. And Valentin, that's the guy I knew, right? Yeah. Valentin, he was around. So I called him, hey, Valentin, hey, we need a system, And then before we started TrekkSoft, we had the domain reserved and used adventureshop.ch. That was basically before we started TrekkSoft. So Valentin was the first version of that. He was coding by himself, and he's really really good. He's extremely fast. So I remember that we were sitting in his apartment and we were sitting next to each other, and then he was just coding, right? I was basically telling him, okay, that's what we need, right? And then he was coding, and it was very fast iteration process, right?
Amazing. No, but I think that's super cool. These early beginnings, basically, these early days. And then actually, why was 2010 or 2012 when it then actually went live with the platform? Why was that the right timing to get started with a booking platform for the travel industry?
So I think it's a bit hard to tell, but I think I would say that back then we thought now we either make it real business or we somehow stuck in a process, right? So I think it was really, we needed to make a step. Basically in 2010 we formed an AG with our own money first. Yeah. And I think that was somehow a natural next step to really have some skin in the game, right? And not just like have it a side project, and my main job was Outdoor Interlaken. Valentin had another main job. And so just to make that next step, we needed to make it more kind of, clear. This is not only a hobby, and this is something which has the right or should have the right to become its own company.
So there are two things that I would like to address here in a bit more detail. So first of all, you did start that on the side besides your regular job, your other activities that basically paid your salary, I imagine, because in the early days, you don't really pay yourself a salary if you start that way. Why was that the right setup for you instead of going all in from the beginning? Was that ever an option, or was it really that step-by-step growth process that was so important to also actually make it as a company?
I think specifically for the people involved, I would say it wasn't an option to, from day one, go all in on that project. So we just wanted to see, why not? Yeah. We just wanted to see a little bit of traction. We wanted to see further. When you start a company, you have an idea, right? So this could work, right? So this is the product, this is the customer, this could work. And then the question is, okay, can you, is it only one customer, or do you have multiple customers, which will be the goal, right? So, and all those little steps, it's almost like a checkbox, right? Like if you evolve in that journey to build up your company. And I think for all of us involved, I think it was clear that we wanted to see the traction before we make a next step.
Did you have any specific milestones or KPIs defined where you said, if we hit these numbers, then we actually start investing our own money, found the AG, and then go in full time? Or how do you deal with that expectation management?
I think back then, what we wanted to see was that we win clients.
Yeah.
I think that was the most important thing for us, to win clients. And the other thing was important, right? And I think that's quite often the case for other young entrepreneurs. So normally the first couple of sales you do inside your network, right? So
True.
You know X, Y, Z, you call them, hey, I have a new great product, you should use it. And then let's say, I'm not sure if that's somehow realistic to view this as the normal conversion you would have in your sales funnel, right? So basically, we wanted to see some independent companies converting as customers, and we did, right? It's and I think I would say a couple of tens, right? So maybe 20, 30 around that. We wanted to see as kind of a proof that this makes sense from a customer perspective.
Got it. The other thing that you mentioned is that at the beginning, there were some solutions out there, but you had the impression, hey, we can do a better job at this. This is something that we often hear, in the early days of an entrepreneur. Maybe you're also a bit naive from the outside perspective, where you say, hey, this is a problem, I want to solve it. Maybe there's nothing really satisfying in the market. And then you just get started. You just start executing things, building software. Is that something that also really helped you to be a bit naive in the beginning, to keep going instead of thinking about all the things that could go wrong and then eventually don't do anything?
I think, yeah, I think so, yeah. Because I think if I look back, oh, wow, I would look at that situation completely different, right? I would say, oh, wow, you have a lot of small clients, right? A lot of long tail clients. And then, and there were systems in the market, right? And I think Valentin, I have to give credit to Valentin. He really pushed, right? He said, oh, now let's do it. Let's get it done. Let's do the next step, right? So that was really the kind of thrive came also from him.
Got it. And how did your product look like in the early days? What were like the core functionalities that you actually also then won clients with?
So we had, the one hostel world system in use, basically, we had some basic functionality we saw, right? And that was like some of the companies later used, and TrekkSoft, they initially used that hostel world system. So we saw a bit, so like simple functionality. Yeah, today you would laugh because of that thing, right? But you would say, so we had that book now button, right? So there is a book now button. You can book your activity online. Right. You get instant confirmation, right? Just you don't have to call. So I think it almost sounds now funny because like 10 years later, you think,
that was a big thing.
Table stakes, right? But back then it was kind of still new, right? And so the main functionality was really that, just like book now buttons. The other thing was then and that's already very industry specific, because it's how you manage your inventory to some degree. We don't call it inventory, but it's basically you manage your trips, your tours, and you have some capacity, and you need to assign capacity to those bookings, right? Or the other way around. So you need to assign the bookings to the capacity. And the kind of management, I think that was something we tried to cover. And that's still one of the most difficult things 10 years later, because there's so many different types of like needs from a customer perspective. So that's that remains a very challenging kind of aspect of in our industry. And then I think the last piece, which was key, was channel management, which is basically the link between our system and OTAs, online travel agencies, like Get Your Guide, Expedia, TripAdvisor. And there that link guarantees that you always have a way to manage everything from one capacity, and that you don't have to manage multiple capacities.
Yeah, otherwise I can imagine you have a lot of manual copy-paste work or update work.
Yeah, you manage then if you don't have channel management, you have to manage the extranet of Get Your Guide, and you manage the extranet of TripAdvisor, and then of Expedia. And early on with Outdoor Interlaken, luckily we had that test, or like that early client, right? Because then we could early on identify quite fast the requirements from a client perspective.
Makes sense. Yeah. So that's actually also very impressive. You solved your own problem that you saw while being active in that industry, basically. Do you think that this is really a necessity to start a successful startup, that you are also the customer of your own solution eventually?
I think it helps to identify product market fit for sure.
Yep.
That's a positive. The negative is that you might have conflict of interest because like I was basically on two sides of the table, right? I was in that case, I also then became a co-owner of Outdoor Interlaken. So I was the customer plus I was the service provider from a software perspective. So but that's the negative. The positive is really you're super close to the client. Yep. And that product market fit is so important to identify early on. That really helps.
So you were then growing towards that product market fit. Many people talk about that product market fit, but how does it actually feel like? Did you also, did anything change, or when did you actually realize that, hey, now we're in a good position, now we have this product market fit? Was there anything special when you noticed that?
I think like if you ask me about the feeling, I would say it's almost like a feeling that makes sense. Right. And before you're just like working with a lot of assumptions, right? You think, okay, this might work or this could work, but then you have to feel, okay, no, we're really solving a problem here, right? And this makes sense. It's almost like a feeling, this makes sense. But I also have to say with product market fit, I think depending on the industry you're in, it might be that you have that experience multiple times, right? Because you basically evolve in your product and you see basically, oh wow, now it makes sense. Basically, what I try to say is that in our case, we found out, okay, this makes sense for a river rafting canyoning company.
Yep.
And it might also make sense in regards of product market fit for a bus company, but it doesn't make sense for a scuba diving company. Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
And if you then later on, and I think we'll come to that, but then if you have investors on board and you have a total addressable market, which is relatively big, or you pitch that it's very big, and it is big, right? But you basically then see, oh wow, the product market fit might be only really true for a subsegment of that market.
Right. Yeah, and talking about investors, in 2013, you then decided to go fundraising. Why did you decide to go that way instead of staying bootstrapped?
I think for software as a service, it's both is possible, but back then I think we thought let's be a bit faster in the process and let's somehow move faster forwards, and let's I think to some degree, like you before said that. You need to be a bit naive, right? And think back then I also thought, like all the cool guys or all the cool startups, Adrian, for example, they have investors, right? So that's what you need, right? So yeah, let's get investors to some degree. I think to some degree I would say naive from that sense that I thought this is the way you do it, right? If you want to have success. Yeah. On the other hand, definitely the speed aspect and and I think like in the type of nature from a software service startup, right? Like you will have to invest a lot of time if you want to bootstrap and finance everything by yourself, right?
Yeah. And in what way was fundraising then helping you to actually, get faster? What did you use the money for that you raised?
I think before that, I think for us it was another validation. If we get from the outside that kind of green light, this makes sense, right? This was also like another milestone for us to reach, right? So we thought, okay, if there are investors who trust us, who give us money, that's great, right? That's another validation in that process. So that was for sure also critical. And then I think in our case, we did invest into marketing sales. So basically build up that sales marketing funnel. Plus then also to invest into R&D for sure, because back then I think we had Valentin and we had our first employee. He's still working with us, which is great. Philippe Gerber, he's a fantastic developer. And so like we had a very small team, and then we started to add on R&D and marketing sales. I would say that was for sure the biggest need for investment in the early days.
Got it. And how does your business model actually look like? You have a mix between a subscription model where you have recurring revenues coming from the tour operators, but you also have a transaction business where you also make money. So how does your business model look like?
You mean back then or now?
Probably back then and now, and how it evolved.
Yeah, so back then we just charged only transactional fees. So before, like, we didn't have any subscription income at all. So it was transactional based. And the way that works, just to explain that maybe, is, so let's assume we charge 100 Swiss franc to the tourist or to the guest of that trip. And let's say, I think back then in the early days, we had 6%. So then we would basically get 6% from 100, so that's 6 Swiss francs. So we keep that 6 Swiss francs as our fee. But it's transactional. So in other words, if there is zero revenue coming in from our clients, so from the operator of canyoning, river rafting, etc., then it's zero, right? Which mirrors basically very good the client. So when he's successful, we're successful as well. Maybe we come to that, but with Corona, COVID, right?
Yes.
So we figured out that there is another side to that as well, right? So that was in the early days. And then later on, we switched a bit to a mixed kind of structure where we have transactional income plus subscription income. And today it's round about like across our group, so TrekkSoft group, 1/3 is subscription income. So classic recurring every month. There is the customer gets billed independent of the revenue he makes, and 2/3 is transactional.
Got it. Was it difficult at the beginning to go for a subscription-based business model, or why did you then decide to switch it later down the road?
So the challenge we faced in regards of the transactional income, and it's still as of today, 10 years later or 7 years later, depending on from where you calculate on. But it's the transactional revenue is very hard to forecast, right?
Right, yeah.
And especially if you have in your sales marketing funnel a lot of new clients coming in every month. If you want to do a lead qualification, for example, how do you do that, right? It's difficult. And it could be very misleading. So it's very difficult to qualify the lead if you only sell transactional based income or revenue. And that was a challenge for us, especially with the way I look at sales is always with rabbits, deers, and elephants, right? So like basically those different kind of levels of size of clients, right? And especially with the long tail clients, so with the rabbits, it's very difficult to judge. You know, are they worthwhile the effort? Yeah. So I think that was the main the kind of driver why we thought for that segment, for that smaller segment of the market, maybe classic recurring revenue subscription is the better way to go.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Another thing that you actually started then in 2015 was to acquire competitors or other companies to join your TrekkSoft group, basically. Why was that the right strategy for you? Yeah,
I think if we go back to the early days, and I think before I said something about, okay, so you identify a product market fit, but you basically pitch then the big total addressable market to your investor base, but you somehow identify that your product market fit is not only really available or is only true for a really sub-segment of that big total addressable market. And in 2016, 17, in that time frame, I just saw that it doesn't make sense to only talk about this big total addressable market. So like a multi-billion-dollar market, right? It's great. Obviously we were using that for the investor pitch, right? For sure. But I saw that if I'm very honest, the more relevant thing for us is to think more in those sub-segments of the market or sub-verticals or however you want to call it, right? And those total addressable markets are not that big. If you isolate it and just say, okay, where do I have product market fit? Basically, I have it for, let's say, canyoning, adventure, one-day tour operators in Switzerland, right? Let's say it's that segment, and it's not the worldwide big segment which involves like museums and attractions, and all that stuff. And if you think it from that perspective, then the question is, okay, basically, what makes now sense, right? Like as a strategy, and there we just saw that there are many very good companies in the market. Most of them were small, medium-sized companies, so not startup with venture funding and stuff like that. So they were more like really good run and basically profitable small, medium-sized companies, which just were addressing relatively small niches inside the tourism industry. Right. And there we thought, hey, like let's see if it makes sense to partner up with those, right? And somehow develop basically our story in a way where we're going towards more in that direction, right? And somehow become a group of niche champions, right? Somehow working in the tourism industry, like having a similar mindset and exchange like best practices, exchange like also somehow competition in a way inside our group, right? Where we want to be all best in class, but not trying to fool ourselves by defining a very big total addressable market, and somehow got lost then somewhere, like in the trial, or basically in our way, or in our initiative to solve the problem of that very big total addressable market.
Water damage or a fire in the office building can mean the end of your startup if you're not properly insured. Whether I'm just starting a new company or growing fast, the topic of insurance is often not a top priority. And that's totally fine. Yet, it's hugely important to be properly covered here. On a personal recommendation, I turned to the insurance broker WSR Partner with my first company. The advice is highly professional and completely independent. As an expert, WSR Partner understands the situation of my startup and obtains quotes from various insurance companies so that I can choose the best offer. They are paid directly by the insurance companies. There were no costs for me at all. Because we work with Alex and the team of WSR Partner, we offer you a free consultation. Get independent and professional advice, whether for startups or an insurance check for established companies. Book your free appointment now at www.swisspreneur.org/WSR. How do you then actually, finance these acquisitions? Do you just raise more money from your investors? Do you do a special deal where you also give the companies that you acquire shares in the whole group, basically, to let them participate in the future success? Or how do you actually execute that?
Yeah, so I have to say we were very lucky that we have investors which are very patient with us. And I think also to some degree, I assume that investors with a lot of experience, they're used to, kind of changing plans to some degree, right? Exactly. So in our acquisitions, we did finance most of it via equity. So and basically by increasing our own equity, and basically getting money to a big degree from our investors and then buying those companies. I have to say, moving forward, that's not the plan we want to continue to execute, because otherwise, at one point, you basically, on the long run, that doesn't make sense, right? But I think back then it made sense, because then our somehow cash flow potential wasn't big enough to finance it by ourselves.
But now that will change eventually. So you want to focus on cash flow acquisitions or stop doing acquisitions? What's your strategy there?
So the strategy is simple. I'm a believer in the rule of 40. So the rule of 40 concept, if I can explain that very,
of course.
In simple terms, is basically the rule of 40. So the number is 40. And you add up organic growth and EBITDA margin, and that should be 40, should equal 40 or better. And now we have a group of companies inside TrekkSoft Group. We are 5 companies. 3 of them operate as software as a service kind of companies. 2 of them were acquired. And then we have 2 two additional companies which were somehow spin-offs out of TrekkSoft. One is Payo, which does payment processing. The other one is Experience Bank, which does channel management. And then the three SaaS companies are TrekkSoft, SaaS we call it. So it's basically our SaaS business. And then we have DigiTickets. This was one of our first acquisitions in the UK. Super successful at the moment. That was really like the outlier in regards of performance. Nice. In the UK. And Waldhard Software, which is a ski school software company. And the way we run it at the moment is really, we believe in that rule of 40. We exchange best practices. And we also believe in niches and relatively small total addressable markets. And we try to be laser focused there, that we don't fool ourselves with big total addressable markets. And with the rule of 40, we are quite open to look at each business as its own business, right? And sometimes there is room to grow. And then obviously growth is always very welcome. But when it doesn't make sense to grow, then we want to basically to come to that rule of 40 result, right? When there is no organic growth, then you need to deliver EBITDA. And EBITDA in our case, I also have to say, that's close to free cash flow. So we don't activate software to a large extent. That's not the goal. So when I talk about EBITDA, it's also here. It's not about fooling ourselves by activating the software. It's really about being as close to free cash flow as possible.
Got it. And that's a significantly different approach than what we heard, for example, in the Bexio story, where you focus on unit economics, as you nicely pointed out in our prep call. So what is the difference there from your perspective, and why does the rule of 40 actually make more sense to you than the unit economics play?
Yeah. So I think that's a good question, and I really enjoyed to listen to your podcast with Jeremias. And I think he explained in very good detail the unit economics kind of view of things, right? So how to run a company from that perspective not only, but to a large extent, you look at those unit economics. So you look at customer acquisition cost, you look at customer lifetime value, and some other KPIs. And we do that to some degree as well. But I think the difference is if it's all about efficiency and you think, does that make sense from an efficiency standpoint, then either the EBITDA or the customer acquisition costs, for example, or any other unit economic is a proxy for efficiency, right? And I think it depends on what you want to achieve, right? Or what we want to achieve to some degree. So if the goal is to say, I don't care about, let's say, everything beyond the customer acquisition costs to some degree. So right. let's assume my intention is to grow, and growth is paid at the moment in the market very good. So in regards of from an investor perspective, right, in regards of valuation, so growth has a very high value at the moment. So if that's the main objective, then I look on customer acquisition cost, I look on customer lifetime value, and I look on churn. And I don't care too much about the efficiency of the rest to some degree. Yeah. But if I look at the EBITDA, assuming that it's free cash flow, or very close to free cash flow, it's a reflection of the efficiency of the full organization, including everything, including the pencil, including the rent, including, right? Yeah. And I think it depends a bit on the objective of the company, right? If you want to generate the free cash flow, you need to look at the EBITDA free cash flow number. In the rule of 40, you look as well on organic growth. So you look at both. If you look on unit economics, I think you basically saying we have capital available, we're willing to burn cash, and it doesn't have to be that you burn cash, but you in theory you would be willing to do so. Right. And the main objective is just to see how fast you can grow, basically. Yeah. Right.
To overemphasize that a bit, it's basically growth at all costs. That's the unit economics play. And potentially you also strive for an exit there to get so big, so valuable, growing so much faster than a large corporate might be able to, so that they then have sort of a need to acquire you. while the efficiency or the rule of 40 play might more be of, hey, we want to have a profitable business. We want to potentially pay dividends, maybe do an IPO one day because we have the good economics to do so. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think yes, and the key point there is the risk appetite, right? So if you're willing to take quite a bit of risk, then I think it can be a very good strategy, right? It's almost like a question of probability of success, right? And do I want to win the $1 million lottery ticket, right? And there are, I think the thing is that there are success cases like Jeremias with Bexio. That was a fantastic success case. So there are examples of people achieving this, right? The $1 million lottery ticket. But I think on the other hand, like I'm also an entrepreneur for myself to basically do the thing I most somehow trust in, right? And where I feel most comfortable in. And I think, and the other thing is then I think both strategy can make a lot of sense. It really depends on the company, right? And on the founder team and where do you feel comfortable with. But the important thing is that you stick then to it, right? So you shouldn't then change all the time from trying to optimize on the growth side or like on unit economics. And then the next day you change to the rule of 40 concept. So that's, I think, the worst, right? So I think either way, it's okay, but don't change it too much, right?
Makes sense. Let's also talk about another challenge that you already brought up briefly, the COVID pandemic all over the globe, basically. So the coronavirus basically also had a huge impact on companies in the travel and leisure industry, obviously. So what was your experience with TrekkSoft? How did that impact you?
Yeah, it's a disaster, right? So this is really not good. I think first of all, it's bad for humanity, right? So like there was like a lot of things which weren't nice, right, to see and happening. And specifically in the tourism industry, this is like tourism industry has some like first of all we have seasonality, then we have cyclicality, right? So it's a lot of those aspects which makes it difficult as an industry per se. But then if something like Corona, COVID hits, right, this is very, very, very difficult. And yeah, I think, like so many things which are difficult then to execute, right? And one of the things I think is difficult then on a emotional level is a bit as well that you basically, as a founder, you don't really know from a budgeting perspective what's now the reality, right? Because we had to change it so many times. And in software, the biggest spending block is humans, right? It's people. Yeah. And so you're always a little bit on that thin line between thinking, okay, now I made a budget, so I'm hopeful that this will work out. But then on the other hand, you see, oh, wow, if it doesn't work out, then I have to let go more people, right? And there's no other way to save money, right?
How did you do that? Like, did you get any support from the government? Did you send your people to short-time work, or what did you do on that regard?
A bit of everything. Yeah. It's, I think, it somehow, it worked out. So we're still here and we have, I think, a good outlook for the future, or a good, I would say we have enough liquidity. And I think we also did adopt quite a bit. So I had to let go quite a bit of people, and not across TrekkSoft group because like not every group company was affected the same. So we had one company in our group almost in 2020 almost making 1 million in net profit. So that was like the best performer, but we had also other companies like the one I'm running as CEO currently, TrekkSoft SaaS, that division, that business unit which was affected very, very big time, and there I had to let go a lot of people, and and then government support for sure. Like we have subsidiaries in a lot of different countries, so this was also some complexity we had to deal with. So I hope that Corona at one point is done, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I know like letting go people is always super hard, super difficult. It's like you have this connection to that person, right? You work with them sometimes even for multiple years. So it's really not easy to let them go. Despite the fact that COVID hit, did that make things easier in any way? Because, it's not like your own fault or you didn't do a misplanning in terms of budgeting and now you can't afford them anymore. Did that help to a certain degree, or was it still a very difficult conversation to have?
I think I thought about that a couple of times.
Okay.
But I think it's completely the wrong direction. Right. I think this is that's another thing where I can fool myself, right? In the end, right? So I think I feel fully responsible for the outcome for those employees who had to go. The other unfortunate thing was that we had a couple of really A players, really good employees, and they left by themselves because they said, like that kind of, this. If you think about motivation for an employee, right, it's basically to some degree as well the career path, right?
Yeah.
And if something like Corona and COVID hits, it's very difficult to give that view to the employee. And then I fully understand the really A players. That we still have a lot of A players, but like some of them they left, right? And that's difficult.
Yeah. Well, was that mainly due to the uncertainty that they say, hey, we don't know when this will go back to normal or change?
I think it's uncertainty, it's options, right? They have alternatives in the market. It's a lot of money in the market. So like a lot of startups have a lot of money to spend, and not everyone is the same affected, right? So not every company is in travel. So they, I think it's multiple reasons in the end. Yeah.
Makes sense. And what was the impact on your revenue side? I mean, you mentioned before, there's the recurring revenue, there's the transactional revenue. What happened to both of them?
Yeah, so we have those 5 companies inside TrekkSoft Group. And like as a group, we lost in 2020, we lost around about 30% of our revenue. And we were close to EBITDA 0, basically. Okay. So close to break even. And I would say, given the circumstances, this was good, but it was mainly driven by companies inside our group, which were not that much affected, right? Yeah. And the kind of special thing in travel specifically was that if you had a very strong focus on domestic, so domestic travel, which means you go to an attraction, to a theme park, or you somehow consume something domestically, then this was not that much affected. And in some cases, there were even effects which were very strong in a positive sense. But the segments which were focused internationally, they suffered big time. Crazy, right? There looked like minus, sometimes in some of those segments, almost minus 90% in some of the months. Yeah. Let's say in April, May, like there was like negative turnover happening, similar to like a Reisebüro, right? Like
of course,
right.
Yeah, I would have also expected like a much higher drop in revenue overall across the whole group. So I think 30%, while it hurts a lot, it's still pretty well managed through such a difficult time.
No, I think I would say I'm super lucky that we have this group of niche champions. Yeah. I think if we wouldn't have done this strategy and we would have naturally focused more on the international markets, then we would be in a very different place. Mm-hmm. I'm very happy that we choose that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. We also like to talk about opponents and supporters. Now, with opponents, many people think about competitors and people that sort of try to trick you into something. But one thing that you actually mentioned to me in the prep call was the inner game of entrepreneurship. So basically, one of the core opponents that you face is yourself. So please tell us a bit more about that, because I think that's super interesting to learn and hear more about.
Yeah, I think, like these days, maybe I start with back then 2010. I thought about competitive landscape and their competitors. Like, and you have that on every investor presentation. That's a must, right? Yep. So you need to identify some of your competitors and you list them, and then you think, I beat all of them, right? In a way,
of
right?
Course,
so
that's the story.
That's the story, right? So, but I think the concept is wrong, right? I think that's not the way to look at it. I think the better way to look at it is more closer to Peter Thiel's perspective on 0 to 1, where he said, like competition is for losers, right? Yeah. But that's a segment. That's just like coming back to those small total addressable markets instead of big total addressable markets, and trying in those small total addressable markets to be number 1 and 2. What I meant in the pre-discussion we had together was, in particular, that I think the competitive landscape still, to some degree, I monitor it. I also have to say that of course it's not that I'm basically ignoring it. That would also be wrong. But I think mentally, with my mind share, I try to focus more on the inner game and the challenges I have with myself, basically. and there, basically, the goal is just to make sure that I carefully listen to challenges I see. And there was an important book from Stefan Merat, Der Weg zum erfolgreichen Unternehmer. That's really a good book, which also somehow addresses that, the inner game, and somehow you could somehow stand in the way of the company development if you not somehow develop yourself.
So what are your biggest fights that you have with yourself in that regard?
I think we don't have enough time to go through all of them, right?
Okay, maybe pick your top one, the one that was the toughest or the most memorable.
For me, it was fear. Yeah, that's a very, very strong feeling, and I somehow I had that in a very strong way, and it took me quite a bit of time, energy, and seminars. I tried to invest a bit of my time into that personal development aspect, right? Somehow to work on that inner game and try to improve. So I did Tony Robbins seminars, or in Germany there is the German Tony Robbins, basically the Christian Bischoff, right? Yeah. So I did some of those seminars. I did read books, but fear was a really strong feeling I had.
What were you afraid of?
I think it was a bit that somehow I wanted just to basically make it right? And somehow I had that pressure. I wanted to make it right. And then I had that somehow feeling of fear that I'm somehow missing out in one form or the other. That's really feeling like as a feeling. Fear is not a nice thing, right?
It can be super strong.
Yeah.
You mentioned the seminars that you took. Did you also get any additional help? Like, did you talk to professionals or anyone else that helped you along the way to manage your fear and the expectations?
I think I tried out everything, and I continue to try out everything. So that's for sure. And I think it's something which is an ongoing process, right? So and I think it's also one of the big chances you have as an entrepreneur to somehow develop your own personality, right? And somehow make sure that you don't stand in the way of the company to develop, to grow. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that so openly. I think many people can actually relate to these feelings and are probably glad to hear that others feel the same way. So I think that's super valuable. Of course, you also have supporters. So, of course, you have investors and everyone on board, your employees. But you also picked 3 very specific people that supported you along the journey. Do you want to share why you picked them and who you actually picked?
Yes, of course. So, like the first one is my fiancée, so my future wife, Ramona. And she is also an entrepreneur. She's a goldsmith, and she has as well a company in a very good location in the middle of Zurich, and she's also running her company as an entrepreneur. And like we have every day basically when we see each other, we have conversations around. Also, like a big topic there is that inner game. Like how do you feel, right? Is it like do you think it's okay, or like and I'm so grateful for that we have those discussions, and or we go walking, and then like we're a couple, right? But we also discuss, right, all those things, right? Of course. So that's super key. And then Valentin, as my co-founder at TrekkSoft and also as a close friend to mine, I think he's great. He's very different in a way to me, right? So he functions differently in his head, and but that's super good to have his view on things. And then the third is Adrian Locher. Like he's still, like if you do early on such like in young ages, like a company together, it's somehow still, I think for me mentally, it's something which still is very close to me, right? And obviously he's an inspiration. He's also doing completely different things, right? But he's definitely an inspiration.
Absolutely. Cool. Good selection, I would say. So let's also look where you currently stand. You cater to operators in over 130 countries all over the world, basically. You are a group of vertical market niche subscale SaaS businesses and businesses in general with over 10 million in revenue before COVID hit. So what's next for you? What are your goals with TrekkSoft and your ambitions?
Yeah. So hopefully at one point Corona will somehow be less a topic, right? So that's key for us, because in the kind of market we're in, that's somehow it is travel industry, right? Tourism industry, and we still see the Corona impact of things. But we're currently working on a 3-year plan. That was, by the way, something which was recommended just recently to me, that we should do a 3-year plan, and I think it's a very good exercise to do. And the goal is really to execute the strategy around smaller total addressable markets. So not take the super big ones, but take the smaller ones. But there have the ambition to be number 1 or number 2 in those segments. Execute the strategy along the rule of 40. So like basically have that internal sports competition that we want to have, that rule of 40 result, or be as close to it as possible. Share best practices, learn from each other. If we see growth potential organically, sometimes we have currently a couple of projects where we do spin-off of basically in an application. There might be like a segment of the application which might have a potential to become its own solution, like its own application. Then we spin those applications off into its own business unit, and then we can use that as a way to grow organically. So that's super exciting at the moment. And then the other thing is still we plan to add additional acquisitions, but those we want to finance with our own free cash flow as much as possible, and don't be dependent on adding more equity.
Nice. A very exciting future. Do you also think about the potential exit or IPO with TrekkSoft?
Obviously, that's another thing which needs to be on every investor pitch, right? So you need to have that kind of exit perspective. I would say that I was thinking a lot about, like how does that perspective looks like, right, from an exit perspective. But I thought now more recently that this is just like almost a bit wasting a bit of my mind share to think too much about that, right? But we had along the ways, we had several kind of potential either ways to sell to a strategical partner, or we had other considerations. But I think for me, I really try to not think too much about that.
Again, don't fool yourself, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So before we wrap up the conversation, we also want to know about your personal gadgets and resources recommendations. Anything comes to mind in terms of books, blogs, podcasts, newsletters that you can recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, so maybe books. I would say Stefan Merat, as I said before. So he actually wrote 3 books, and I think all of the 3 are really good.
Cool.
I listen a lot of on Audible, like those. That's great. So Audible as a gadget, maybe. And I think at the moment, what I'm really excited about is as well the Entrepreneur Operating System, EOS.
That's fantastic.
I really think that's great, and I like one of the companies already did implement that, and I plan to add it to more of the group companies. So,
we actually also once did a dedicated podcast episode about that EOS system with the EOS implementer Chris Burger. It was fantastic, and we also use it ourselves at Swisspreneur for 3 years. It's nice. Super cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's another positive confirmation that we should focus a bit more on that. Yeah,
absolutely. So for the very last part, we prepared some rapid fire questions for you. So I either give you a choice or a short question, and you have to basically explain to us why you made that choice or what you answer in one sentence. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So vacation in Switzerland or vacation abroad?
Switzerland.
Where in Switzerland?
Oh, either in Ascona or in Arosa.
Got it. Are you a Migros or a Coop child?
Coop.
Now, this will be a tough one. Zurich or Interlaken?
Like my heart, like where the love is, right? And the love currently is because of Ramona. It's in Zurich.
Got it. What title should we give to this interview?
Learnings from a Rule of 40 / subscale SaaS operator.
Cool.
That sounds complex, no?
I also have another suggestion. Don't fool yourself.
Don't fool yourself. Yeah, maybe that's also
that was also a good one.
Yeah.
You make decisions in 5 hours or 5 months? Or 5 minutes, maybe.
No, I'm more on the faster side, I would say. It's more like 5 hours. Yeah, maybe 5 hours, depending on the decision, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And do you have any favorite activity on TrekkSoft?
What kind of activity?
Anything that you like to book or use yourself from all the offerings that you have on the platform.
Are you really asking me that now?
Yeah.
Because I would do now a very long advertising for Outdoor Interlaken. So you can book in Interlaken everything on outdoorinterlaken.ch. It's river rafting, canyoning, whatever you like. So those are fantastic. And behind, you will book with TrekkSoft and have an awesome booking experience.
Well, that was a very good promo spot.
Yeah, that was a good promo, right?
But to be fair, we actually did a Swisspreneur skydiving in Interlaken about 1 week ago. That was fantastic.
That's really good. Yeah,
we love the region. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's nice.
Cool. And I think with these beautiful images in our head, that's the perfect way to end today's conversation. Philippe, thank you so much for being here today. All the best of fighting Corona and getting back to the 10 million revenue. And we're super excited to see what you will build in the future.
Thanks a lot, Silva.
This episode was brought to you by Swisspreneur's main partner, Clara Business, the digital all-in-one solution for small businesses. Managing internal processes manually and on paper wastes an incredible amount of time. That's why Clara digitizes everything, allowing you to focus on what really matters, your core business. Go to clara.ch to find out how your business administration can be simpler, faster, and more efficient. Again, that's clara.ch.